On February 13, 2017, two girls went for a hike on a trail in Delphi, Indiana. Libby was 14, Abby was 13. Libby had her phone. At some point on that trail, she pointed her camera at a man walking toward them on a bridge. She recorded him. She recorded his face. She recorded his walk. She recorded his voice. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know she was recording the last moments before he killed them both. Their bodies were found the next morning in a creek bed below the bridge. Libby's phone was still with her. The video was still on it. For 6 years and 8 months, that image circulated across the internet. Every detail examined, every pixel debated. Millions of people tried to identify the man on the bridge. He was in Delphi the whole time. He attended their memorial. He filled prescriptions for people who came to his pharmacy still wearing their black clothes after the funeral. His name was Richard Allen. And in October 2024, 7 years after Libby pointed her phone at him, a jury found him guilty on 2 counts of murder. Before anything else, Liberty Rose German went by Libby. She was 14 years old. She loved photography, social media, and spending time with her best friend. Abigail Williams went by Abby. She was 13. She was quiet, creative, and had known Libby most of her life. On the afternoon of February 13, 2017, a Monday, no school, Libby's grandfather dropped the two of them off at the Monon High Bridge trailhead in Delphi, a small town of about 3,000 people in Carroll County, Indiana. It was a well-known local trail. Families went there. Children went there. It felt safe. Libby posted a photo of Abby on Snapchat at 2:07 p.m., standing on the old wooden bridge. That was the last known image either of them sent to anyone. They never came home. The search began that evening when the girls failed to arrive at the pickup point. Family and volunteers spread across the trail. The next morning, February 14th, their bodies were found in a creek bed just below the bridge. They had been murdered. When investigators recovered Libby's phone, they found something extraordinary. She had recorded a man on the bridge. Not a long video, not a clear video, but a video. The man walked toward them on the narrow wooden slats of the Monon High Bridge, hands in his pockets, head slightly down. About 43 seconds of footage. And at some point, investigators believe after he had already confronted the girls, Libby's phone captured his voice. 5 words. Guys, down the bridge. A command, not a question. Investigators took the footage and released a single frame to the public. A blurry image of a man in a blue jacket, jeans, walking with purpose. They called him Bridge Guy. They asked the public for help. What followed was one of the largest crowdsourced identification efforts in American true crime history. For 6 years, the case went nowhere publicly. The image was everywhere. Forums dissected every pixel. Reddit threads ran into the thousands. YouTube channels devoted entire series to the case. True crime podcasters returned to it again and again. In 2019, investigators released a second, slightly clearer image and updated the voice recording with enhanced audio. They also changed their description of the suspect. The new profile describes someone who may have changed their appearance significantly, someone who may have been hiding in plain sight. In October 2022, 5 years and 8 months after the murders, Indiana State Police arrested Richard Matthew Allen. He was 50 years old. He was a pharmacist. He worked at a CVS in Delphi. He had lived in Delphi his entire life, less than a mile from the bridge. Richard Allen was not a stranger to Delphi. He was part of the community. He knew families in town. As a pharmacist, he likely knew the families of both victims. After the murders, he did what many people in Delphi did. He attended the community vigils. He showed up at the memorials. He stood in the same spaces as the grieving families of the girls he had killed. He continued filling prescriptions. He continued going to work. He continued living less than a mile from the bridge. For nearly 6 years. While the entire internet tried to identify the man in the blue jacket, while investigators quietly built their case, the evidence that finally closed it came from 2 directions at once, and neither of them was the photograph. The physical evidence in this case had been collected from the scene in 2017. At the creek bed where Abby and Libby were found, investigators had recovered an unspent .40 caliber cartridge, a single bullet that had not been fired, suggesting it had been ejected from a gun, possibly during a struggle or when the shooter racked the slide. For 5 years, that bullet sat in evidence, waiting. The ballistic match. When Richard Allen was arrested in 2022, investigators searched his home and recovered a Sig Sauer P226 handgun, chambered in .40 caliber. The unspent cartridge recovered from the scene was forensically matched to Allen's specific weapon. Not just the caliber, not just the model. The cartridge had been cycled through that specific gun. The phone data. Allen's phone records placed him on or near the Monon High Bridge Trail on the afternoon of February 13, 2017. During the window when Abby and Libby were there. The video. Investigators had spent years refining their analysis of the bridge footage. The gait, the build, the jacket, the way the man walked on the narrow wooden bridge. When they compared the footage to Richard Allen, the match was consistent. The confession. After his arrest, Richard Allen made statements to investigators that placed him at the scene. He later attempted to walk back what he had said. His attorneys argued the statements were unreliable. The jury did not agree. The witness accounts. Multiple witnesses placed a man matching Allen's description on or near the trail on the afternoon of the murders. 5 pieces, stacked on each other, pointing in one direction. Richard Allen's trial began in October 2024 in Carroll County, Indiana, more than 7 years after the murders. The trial had faced extraordinary obstacles. Allen's original defense attorneys were removed from the case. There were legal battles over evidence, over pretrial publicity, over where the trial should be held. The case had attracted more public attention than almost any in Indiana's recent history. But in the courtroom, the jury heard the evidence, the ballistic match, the phone data, the video, the statements he had made after arrest, the witnesses who placed him at the scene. On October 28, 2024, the jury found Richard Allen guilty on both counts of murder. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. He will die in prison. Libby's grandmother, who had raised her, sat in that courtroom and watched it happen. There is something specific about this case that belongs in this series. Libby German did not know she was collecting evidence. She was a 14-year-old girl who saw something that frightened her and did what teenagers do. She pointed her phone at it. That instinct, that completely ordinary teenage instinct, created the most studied piece of evidence in the case. For 6 years, millions of people looked at that image. And the man in the image went to work, filled prescriptions, attended memorials, but Libby's phone didn't know that he thought he was safe. The video existed, the voice recording existed, the unspent cartridge existed. Evidence doesn't expire. Evidence doesn't forget. Evidence doesn't get tired of waiting. 7 years is a long time. It was not long enough for the evidence to disappear. Richard Allen is 57 years old. He will never leave prison. Libby German was 14 years old when she filmed him on that bridge. She could not have known what she was doing. She could not have known that 7 years later, a jury would watch that video and return a verdict. But the phone was in her hand, and she pressed record. Abby Williams was 13. She was standing right next to her. They both deserved to walk off that bridge and go home. If this case has stayed with you, drop a comment below. Do you think cases like this, where the victim inadvertently captured the evidence, should change how we think about what our phones record? Subscribe so you don't miss the next verdict. Justice was served.